Welcome to another episode of Army Up Table Talk. And today we are joined by Army Up Councilmember Jayna Jansen. And Jayna is co-located at Fort Hood, where I am. And so we have the unique privilege of being able to join together from the great state of Texas. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for the I'm so jealous.
I know. Denise should have flown in and joined us right here in my kitchen.
Oh.
But Jayna is an Army spouse of 10 years and is a great advocate for Army spouse employment. She is an RN and recently completed her master's degree. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that moving forward. And she has a lot of fantastic insight on licensure reciprocity, surviving the relicensure process, overcoming resume gaps and utilizing internships in higher ed for career advancement. So we look forward to having this conversation today. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. So my name is Jayna. I graduated with my BSN in 2012 from Mary Horn Baylor. I was married to my Army spouse at that time. And then since then, I have worked acute care. I've done postpartum care. I worked home health. I completed my master's in nursing informatics, which I'll touch on in just a minute. And then I'm back on the med surg for acute care right now.
Awesome.
So as an Army spouse, what challenges have you encountered career-wise?
Yeah, so I think, across the board for spouses, having flexibility is probably the biggest. A lot of times our spouse's career are kind of prioritized. And so having that flexibility with hours and shifts for nurses can be really difficult. And then obviously moving every couple of years is hard to have that continuity within a workplace. So those have been the two big ones for me.
So can you touch a little bit more on childcare? How do you handle that with a 7 to 7 shift, or what do your schedules normally look like?
Yeah, so right now I'm working 7 to 7 overnight. And so that works out well right now because my husband's schedule is predictable. That's not always like that, but we kind of have that flexibility right now. So he's obviously there overnight with the kids. And then when I get home, I do drop off. And then I sleep a little bit, and then I'll do pickup as well. And so what I have found is the easiest for me is just kind of having realistic expectations on what that balance is going to look like, because it's going to change. We kind of go through like seasons of life. And so that balance and what works as far as childcare and time management is definitely going to change. And you just have to kind of work with that and be flexible.
Yeah, I always think nursing would be a really hard schedule to work with childcare. You'd have to have a lot of good friendships and able to, pick people up in case of an emergency or whatever.
Yeah, and I will say that the blessing of nursing is it doesn't have to be 12-hour shifts. So when I was working home health, I was actually working, and I loved home health for the aspect that it was flexible, but I was working every other weekend, and it was a 16-hour Saturday and a 16-hour Sunday, which sounds like a ton of time, but home health, I was one-on-one with a patient and there's a lot of downtime. So I had that flexibility. And then, there's a lot of nurses who work in case management or even as a school nurse that have a more predictable 9 to 5 type job. So what's great about nursing is, if the 12-hour shifts don't work for you, there's so many other things that you can do.
Yeah, that makes, I really, sometimes not being in the health industry, I don't think about all the other options there are as opposed to just working in a hospital. So can you talk a little bit about resume gaps and how you have addressed those as you've progressed with your Army spouse life?
Absolutely. So right after I graduated, my husband was at Captain's Career Course, and so we were only there for a few months. And so I didn't work during that time knowing we'd be moving again. And so when we got to, it was Fort Campbell was our next duty station after that, a lot of employers are looking at me as a new graduate who graduated and didn't work for the first 4 months. And that was kind of hard. And so what worked best for me is to be open and honest with employers about what that resume gap was there for, and then applied to every position I could find. And a lot of the nursing positions that you're going to look at will give you specific qualifications as far as time. Like they want you to have worked at least 1 or 2 years in this unit before you can apply. I kind of felt like I could justify why I might not necessarily need that much experience right off the bat. And so I applied to those jobs anyways, and I actually got a job that was RN experience required as a new grad. And in the interview, I was able to kind of justify why I felt like I would be a good candidate, even though I didn't have that experience right off the bat.
I think that's a great point, because oftentimes as I've worked with female candidates that come into military spouse jobs and through the Army Up program, a lot of times they kind of sell themselves short and don't want to apply for those roles that they may not meet every single block. And so I always encourage them to apply, and if they say no, they say no, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of what I experienced with my internship. So while I was doing home health, I realized that the timing would be good for me to go back to school. And I chose to go back for my master's because it gave me flexibility in the future if I wanted that 9-to-5 job. This is going to look better in a resume. I had the downtime while I was doing home health to kind of do some reading and work on papers. Once I was done that with the school portion of that, I had to complete my practicum or my clinical hours. And that was to be I was to set that up by my own. So the school didn't arrange for a preceptor for me. And so what I struggled with that is I asked every single facility in the area we are in now. So 4 or 5 different hospitals I reached out to. This was also summer of 2020. So big time with COVID. And I got on LinkedIn, found people, that were informatics nurses in the hospitals, reach out to them directly. And you have to be okay with being told no, because people are going to tell you no. And I finally got in contact with a lady over in administration at Darnell, which is the hospital on post here at Fort Hood. And she got me set up with the lieutenant colonel who worked as the nursing informatics specialist at Darnell. And he was willing to take me on as an orientee. And so how that process kind of works is it's unit specific. So whoever you want to work with, it's up to them if they're willing to let you on or not. And then if you're on a military facility, you have to do a full background screening and all of that. And so I kind of went through the whole HR process as if I were to be an employee, but did my orientation there. And it was very, very helpful.
Did you find a lot of red tape, or did you think it was very difficult, or is that something that other spouses that are looking for that practicum portion, it's obtainable for them where they are?
Yeah. So initially I didn't reach out to Darnell because I thought there would be a lot of that red tape. And actually I found it to be a lot easier once I got in contact with that specific lieutenant colonel. And that might just have been individual specific, is that he was really eager to kind of teach where he was coming from. And for those who might not know, nursing informatics is kind of like the bridge between the IT department and the nursing department. So you have, when you're on the floor working as a nurse, almost everything you do is done digitally. And a lot of times the IT department doesn't necessarily understand the medical terminology that goes along with the charting systems. And so you kind of bridge that gap. You can also work with process improvement or quality improvement. So that was a really, really good experience.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of that. Are there any additional certifications that could help with your field, like Lean Six Sigma?
Yes, absolutely. And then for informatics and really any nursing specialty, I would really recommend getting your board certification. And that's going to make, even if you have resume gaps, a board certification, whether it be in acute care, ICU nursing, anything like that, is really going to make you stand out.
What does board certification mean?
So
I'm a lay person here.
No. Board certification is essentially you have enough experience in an area, whether it be a specific degree or just years working in that specialty, that you literally sit before the board, you'll take a test, and it just kind of qualifies you as, hey, this person, this is like their specialty. We're going to board certify them.
So it validates your qualifications.
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
So the key, it seems like what you're saying is it's really important as a nurse, and I teach this to my students, my freshman students, that it's so important to diversify yourself inside what your career path is. Not just being a nurse, which is so important, but especially as a spouse, making sure that you are broadening your capabilities when you do move so frequently.
And I feel like as Army spouses, that's what we're really good at, right? We're good at being flexible and adaptable. And that, that's really another way to fill those gaps, is to be adaptable. Maybe your dream job is to work labor and delivery, but the hours aren't going to work right now. So for, the next year or year and a half, you work home health with something that's more flexible. It's accommodating to childcare so that when you are ready to apply for that dream job, you don't have those large gaps.
Yeah, that's great feedback for spouses moving forward, because I think that sometimes the process of moving and then your spouse being gone, working odd hours can be very overwhelming.
It can be very overwhelming. And something I haven't touched on yet is another blessing of the nursing field is that right now we are in huge demand. So I am working between 2 and 3 shifts a week, but I am designated a PRN employee right now, or the other way to define that would be as needed. So I only have to work 4 shifts a month. Yeah. So, but however, so like next week I'm working 4. So it gives me the flexibility of, hey, if this is not a good time for my family, my husband's in the fields, or whatsoever, I don't necessarily have to be at work. And so our weeks go Sunday to Saturday. So I could work a Saturday and a Sunday back to back, and that'd be good for 2 weeks. And so that flexibility is really nice and important to remember, as, like I said, seasons of life change, that nursing can give you that flexibility.
That does provide a lot of options, and that, for meeting that lifestyle that demands that sometimes we have as Army spouses. So what advice do you have for spouses that are looking to get into the healthcare field? Maybe they are feeling some of those concerns, or do you have any specific feedback or input for them?
Yeah, 2 things really kind of come to mind. And that would be, first of all, don't wait for the timing to be perfect, because there's always going to be something where it's like, if the timing was just a little bit different, or if we weren't doing this, I think I have made the mistake of doing that and wishing later on I would have just jumped into it, because realizing it would have worked and I wouldn't have had that gap in that area. And then the other really big thing is I grew up Army. And so what my mom had always taught us moving around was to embrace the change. And so that's just embracing the seasons, embracing the change of duty stations, embracing the change of wherever your work assignment is, and just making the most of it.
Now, so with COVID, and we know how the nursing industry has been impacted, what would you advise to spouses who maybe had considered nursing in the past and maybe might be a little reserved on selecting nursing as a career path?
Yeah, so like I had mentioned earlier, I just went back on the floor after 4 years of not working with patient care, or in the hospital, in inpatient setting. And so I was a little hesitant with COVID, but what I have seen now, comparing it to pre-COVID and now, is there are so many amazing learning experiences right now. The acuity of patients I'm getting is higher. I've only been back in the inpatient setting for a little over a month, and I feel like I've already learned so much more than I've learned in my past 10 years of nursing. So if there are nurses out there, military spouse nurses, who are hesitant to get into the nursing field, what I would tell them is now is as good a time as ever. We are in high demand. You can negotiate your schedule. You can negotiate salary. There's a great time to learn, because there is so much going on within the healthcare setting right now. And what better to say 5 to 10 years from now on a resume, hey, I worked during COVID. This is everything I learned from that experience. This is just a really great experience to go through as a healthcare professional.
Yeah, really good points. One thing I did want to end on was, do you have any advice for spouses who may have been a nurse early on in their spouse's career and maybe have taken 5 or 10 years off? They needed that time for different seasons of their life or whatever. Do you have any advice for them getting back into the nursing field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know there's a lot of hospitals that if they have nurses who have not been on the floor for a long period of time, they will offer you a nurse residency program, similar to how they would a new graduate. And that's something you definitely negotiate. Like I mentioned earlier, nurses are in high demand. So if you want to be back on the floor, now is the time to get in it. And if you feel like you need that type of orientation or residency, then they're offering it almost as like a new graduate type.
Yeah, I've heard from spouses, sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming because the healthcare industry changes so rapidly. There's so many new advances, and platforms, like how they're using, how are they putting in their patient notes and everything. And I think that sometimes it can be overwhelming just to, okay, I've been out for a while and now I've got to get back in. But thank you so much for joining us
thank you for having
today.
me.
This has been an awesome conversation. And
I'm just so sad I wasn't there.
next time, Denise, you'll have to come to the great place and join us.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much once again, and join us next time on our next episode of Army Up Table Talk.